You're listening to The Philosopher's Note on a New Earth. More wisdom in less time.
This is Brian welcoming you to The Philosopher's Notes on A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose by Eckhart Tolle. We'll start with a quote from Eckhart Tolle. Quote, "A new heaven is the emergence of a transformed state of human consciousness, and a new earth is its reflection in the physical realm." End quote. You know, there's a reason that Oprah decided to team up with Eckhart Tolle to create an unprecedented 10-week course to teach the principles in A New Earth to hundreds of thousands of people. It's a remarkable book. Tolle has a profound ability to take the complex ideas of spirituality and consciousness and boil them down into simple, powerful lessons easily grasped and applied to our lives. I'm excited to share some of my favorite big ideas from his book, but I'm barely going to scratch the surface of the depth of transformative ideas Tolle presents in this book. If you haven't read it yet, I strongly recommend you take some time to curl up with this gem and dive deeper into understanding how we can transform our consciousness and create a new earth. First, let's start with some good news and bad news. Quote, "A significant portion of the Earth's population will soon recognize, if they haven't already done so, that humanity is now faced with a stark choice: evolve or die." End quote. Tolle starts A New Earth with some good news and some bad news. We'll start with the bad news. We've inherited a collective dysfunction. For the history of humanity, as Tolle bluntly points out, we, as a collective society, have been acting like a criminally insane person, with, quote, chronic paranoid delusions, a pathological propensity to commit murder and acts of extreme violence and cruelty, end quote. Yikes. According to Tolle, the cause of this state is simple. It's, quote, fear, greed, and the desire for power, end quote. The great traditions have named this dysfunction of the mind. Hinduism calls it Maya, which means veil of delusion. Buddhism calls it dukkha, which means suffering, unsatisfactoriness, or just plain misery. And, directly translated, the word dukkha points to being stuck like a potter's wheel that screeches as it turns. And Christianity calls it sin, which, when stripped of all of its cultural baggage and properly translated from its Greek origins, means to miss the mark, as in an archer missing the target. Tolle's point is simple. We carry a lot of inherited cultural baggage. The good news? The same traditions point to the other side of the dysfunction. Hinduism juxtaposes Maya with enlightenment. Buddhism juxtaposes dukkha with awakening. And Christianity points from sin to salvation. The first step, to recognize our own insanity. As Tolle advises, quote, to recognize one's own insanity is, of course, the arising of sanity, the beginning of healing and transcendence, end quote. Can you see it? Can you recognize your own fear, greed, and desire for power? And can you see how this results in your own mini-wars within your own consciousness, and in relationships with your family, your friends, your colleagues, and your community? Pause for a moment and check in to your own embodiment of our inherited insanity. That's a powerful step toward creating a new earth. Let's move to the next big idea, your state of consciousness. Quote, how spiritual you are has nothing to do with what you believe, but everything to do with your state of consciousness. This, in turn, determines how you act in the world and interact with others, end quote. That's powerful, and it actually makes me think of my childhood. We went to church every Sunday. I was raised Catholic, and I always found it extraordinarily odd that after the service, my dad would pretty much be yelling about how poorly everyone was driving on the way out of the parking lot. Even as a young boy, that always seemed just a little bit off. As Tolle so beautifully says, what we believe means nothing. How we act, which is determined by our consciousness, is what it's all about. How about you? How do you act? Is it in accordance with your beliefs or with your consciousness? The next big idea is heaven and earth. Heaven and earth. The path to get there? Well, first, Tolle brilliantly establishes the fact that, quote, we need to understand that heaven is not a location, but refers to the inner realm of consciousness. then, quote, a new heaven is the emergence of a transformed state of human consciousness, and a new earth is its reflection in the physical realm. Brilliant. So, how do we transform our consciousness? We need to start by understanding what's getting in the way. Enter the ego. Quote, ego is no more than this, identification with form, which primarily means thought forms. If evil has any reality, and it has a relative, not an absolute reality, this is also its definition. Complete identification with form, physical forms, thought forms, emotional forms. This results in a total unawareness of my connectedness with the whole, my intrinsic oneness with the source. This forgetfulness is original sin, suffering, delusion. When this delusion of utter separateness underlies and governs what I think, say, and do, what kind of world do I create? To find the answer to this, observe how humans relate to each other, read a history book, or watch the news on television tonight. End quote. Wow, that's definitely worth a rewind and re-listen. The basic idea is this. To the extent we are identified with our thoughts, or any other relative form, we are separate from source. When we are separate from source, we're in trouble. All of a sudden, we fail to see the interconnectedness of each of us and everything in our world. We are in Maya or dukkha or sin, and from that place, we are insane. We do bad things. As Tolle says, you want to see what that looks like? Watch the news tonight, or log on to CNN. I'm always blown away by the insanity of their homepage. So-and-so killed this person, this bomb went off here, etc., etc., etc. All right, let's dig a little deeper into this ego issue. The next big idea is my. Quote, the reason why such acute suffering occurs is concealed in the word my. End quote. My toy, my car, my house, my spouse, my country, my life, my. S.N. Gwanka, the teacher who led the silent 10-day Vipassana meditation class I took, had a hilarious story about my. He said, imagine someone else's watch got stolen. Someone else's car broke down en route to an important meeting. Someone else's order was messed up at the restaurant. Someone else's spouse cheated on them. Unfortunate, but not that big of a deal for you, right? All right, how about this? Imagine my watch was stolen. My car broke down. My order was messed up at the restaurant. My spouse cheated on me. Takes on a whole new meaning when we add the word my, doesn't it? It's time to quit taking ourselves quite so seriously. Let's witness our reactions to things. Develop the ability to see ourselves as an actor in this game of life and loosen up on our grip of all things my. All right, let's move into the next big idea, which is role-playing. Eckhart says, quote, when you are completely identified with a role, you confuse a pattern of behavior with who you are, and you take yourself very seriously, end quote. Newsflash, you are not the roles you play in your life. Step back, take a deep breath, and realize you are much bigger than any one role you play. Lighten up, laugh, connect to source. And let's look at the next big idea, pain bodies. Quote, because of the human tendency to perpetuate old emotion, almost everyone carries in his or her energy field an accumulation of old emotional pain, which I call the pain body. End quote. Pain bodies. It's a fascinating concept Tolle presents in detail throughout the book. In short, quote, any negative emotion that is not fully faced and seen for what it is, in the moment it arises, does not completely dissolve. It leaves behind a remnant. And end quote. And that remnant shows up in your pain body. It's that energy that you can almost feel from 5 feet away when you're near someone who's suffering. The key to dissolving it? Accept what is. Become whole as you realize that your pain and your challenges are simply evolutionary support, which is our next big idea. Quote, life will give you whatever experience is most helpful for the evolution of your consciousness. How do you know this is the experience you need? Because this is the experience you are having at this moment. End quote. I love that. Reminds me of Byron Katie. She says, quote, how do I know that the wind should blow? It's blowing. End quote. And she adds, quote, I realize that it's insane to oppose it. When I argue with reality, I lose, but only 100% of the time. Guess what? What's happening is happening. We can fight it or we can embrace the opportunity to grow with it. Your call. All right, the next big idea is suffering. Quote, one of the ego's many erroneous assumptions, one of its many deluded thoughts is, I should not have to suffer. That thought itself lies at the root of suffering. Suffering has a noble purpose, the evolution of consciousness and the burning up of ego. End quote. That's brilliant. How do you respond to your suffering? Do you say to yourself that it shouldn't be happening? Not a very empowering position to take, huh? What if we could learn to embrace it as a process serving our enlightenment? What if we could embrace Rumi's wisdom that, quote, this discipline and rough treatment are a furnace to extract the silver from the dross. This testing purifies the gold by boiling the scum away, end quote. And as we embrace the noble purpose of suffering in the process of polishing our souls, let's remember another gem from Rumi. He says, quote, if you are irritated by every rub, how will you be polished? End quote. Absolutely beautiful. All right, let's move on to the next big idea, shadow. Tolle says, quote, the particular egoic patterns that you react to most strongly in others and misperceive as their identity tend to be the same patterns that are also in you, but that you are unable or unwilling to detect within yourself. This idea that what we find most annoying in others is really an indicator of what we find unconsciously most annoying in ourselves is a very powerful one. Jung called it our shadow and said, quote, unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow. And the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. Furthermore, it is constantly in contact with other interests, so that it is continually subjected to modifications. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected and is liable to burst forth suddenly in a moment of unawareness. At all events, it forms an unconscious snag, thwarting our most well-meant intentions. End quote. The fastest way to identify our shadow? Take a look at what bothers you in other people. Other teachers like relationship experts Gay and Katie Hendricks call this projecting. We project our own issues onto others. It's funny how it works, but whatever we're most annoyed in ourselves, unconsciously we're going to see in other people. Are you annoyed when people are impatient? Guess what? Look at how you show up as an impatient jerk in your life more often than you'd like to admit, and your reaction to impatience will probably dissolve. Are you annoyed when people are inauthentic, are greedy, are self-obsessed? Same thing. Look within and watch your reactions dissolve. This is a really powerful exercise. Try it out. The next time you're upset, pause for a moment. Take a deep breath, and then probably another one, and identify what it is you're finding frustrating in the other person. And see how this is really just an issue you need to address in your life. Here's some more thoughts on shadow from Carl Jung. He says, to confront a person with their own shadow is to show them their own light. And one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. All right, let's move to the next big idea, your thoughts. Quote, if there is nothing you can do, face what is and say, well, right now, this is how it is. I can either accept it or make myself miserable. The primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but your thoughts about the situation. Be aware of the thoughts you are thinking. Separate them from the situation, which is always neutral, which always is as it is. End quote. This is another truth that's echoed across cultures and across millennia. From Epictetus in his Enchiridion 2,000 years ago, he says, we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. To Shakespeare in Hamlet, he says, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. To Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, quote, everything can be taken from a man, but one last thing, the last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. How about you? Are you a victim to your circumstances, or do you realize that you have the power, always, to choose how you respond to a situation? All right, a couple more big ideas. The next one with life. Tolle says, quote, "There are 3 words that convey the secret of the art of living, the secret of all success and happiness. One with life." End quote. That's so true. The essence of Tolle's work can certainly be distilled into these 3 words, one with life. So take a deep breath, smile, and enjoy the God within you as we move to our final big idea in this great book, enthusiasm. Enthusiasm comes from the Greek, quote, enthusiasm. That means to be possessed by a god. With enthusiasm, you will find that you don't have to do it all by yourself. In fact, there is nothing of significance you can do by yourself. Sustained enthusiasm brings into existence a wave of creative energy, and all you have to do is ride the wave. End quote. I absolutely love that. And I offer, may we be one with life as we ride the wave of the God dancing within as we create heaven on a new earth. That wraps up this Philosopher's Notes. Really appreciate your time, and I'll give you a quick bio on Eckhart Tolle and then a couple of recommended notes, and then we'll look at some of the quotes from the sidebar before we officially sign off. First, a little bit more about Eckhart. From his website, EckhartTolle.com, Eckhart is a spiritual teacher and author who was born in Germany and educated at the universities of London and Cambridge. At the age of 29, a profound inner transformation radically changed the course of his life. The next few years were devoted to understanding, integrating, and deepening that transformation, which marked the beginning of an intense inward journey. Later, he began to work in London with individuals and small groups as a counselor and spiritual teacher. Since 1995, he has lived in Vancouver, Canada. Eckhart Tolle is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Power of Now, translated into 33 languages, and the highly acclaimed follow-up, A New Earth, which are widely regarded as 2 of the most influential spiritual books of our time. Again, that's from EckhartTolle.com. That's EckhartTolle.com, where you can learn more about Eckhart and his teachings. And if you liked this note, you'll probably like the ones on The Power of Now, Rumi, 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and A Living Enlightenment. All right, let's take a quick look at the quotes. The first several are from Eckhart Tolle, starting with, quote, "This book is about you. It will change your state of consciousness or it will be meaningless." And how spiritual you are has nothing to do with what you believe, but everything to do with your state of consciousness. And we need to understand that heaven is not a location, but refers to the inner realm of consciousness. And there are people who have renounced all possessions who have a bigger ego than some millionaires. Further, usually people are completely unaware of the roles they play. They are those roles. And nothing ever happened in the past that can prevent you from being present now. And if the past cannot prevent you from being present now, what power does it have? The answer is none. All right, next quote. "When you want to arrive at your goal more than you want to be doing what you are doing, you become stressed." I love that. And here's a quote from Connie Zwig, not sure if that's how you say her last name, the author of Romancing the Shadow. She says, quote, "The shadow disguises itself in our projections, when we react intensely to a trait in others that we fail to see in ourselves." How about Ram Dass? He says, "If you think you are so enlightened, go and spend a week with your parents." How true is that? All right, then we have another one by Eckhart Tolle. "The primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but your thoughts about the situation." And a Zen saying, "Don't seek the truth. Just cease to cherish opinions." And finally, St. Augustine tells us, "Love and do what you will." Now, on that note, we'll sign off, and I hope that you have a fantastic day. Love and do what you will.
We hope you enjoyed this Philosopher's Note. Please go to www.philosophersnotes.com to download more.